Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for being here at the Museum of the African Diaspora. My name is Nia McAllister, and I'm the Senior Public Programs Manager here at MoAD. Today, we are here for an incredible artist talk in reflection of the exhibition Spectrum on Color and Contemporary Art. Today, we'll be treated to a conversation with artists Delita Martin and Tawny Chatmon, who are both featured in the exhibition Spectrum. And we will have the conversation moderated by Luke Williams, who is MoAD's Curatorial Fellow. So before I introduce our wonderful guests here, I'm going to share a little bit about the exhibition. Spectrum on Color and Contemporary Art is curated by Kijo Lee, MoAD's Chief of Curatorial Affairs and Public Programs, and the exhibition is currently on view here in the galleries behind you here on the second floor. In this exhibition, a multi-generational and international group of contemporary Black artists illuminate the importance of color to both form and content of their work. Through a series of thematic couplings and groupings, visitors can explore how each artist employs color to convey mood, identity, architecture, events, and more. And so with that, I'm excited to introduce our guest today. Firstly, we have Tawny Chatmon, who is a photography-based artist residing in Maryland, who takes a multi-layered approach in her process. She does not restrict herself to following any set of rules and does not subscribe exclusively to traditional photography practices. Her photographs are often digitally intensified by exaggerating the hairstyles of her subjects, who are often her children and other family members, while also hand-painting and embellishing her portraits with acrylic paint, 24-karat gold leaf, in addition to materials such as semi-precious stones, glass, and other mixed media. Delita Martin is a contemporary artist living and working in Huffman, Texas. Martin's work explores the beauty and complexity of spiritual identities of African American women. And through her mixed media printmaking practice, which includes the layering of various printmaking processes, drawing, painting, collaging, and hand stitching, she celebrates their strength and resilience in a world that often overlooks or devalues them. Through her use of pattern, texture, and color, she creates immersive veilscapes, spirit worlds, that are deeply personal yet accessible to viewers. Her distinctive style combines elements of realism, abstractions, and symbolism, creating bold and beautiful portraits of Black women as they transition between the spirit world and the waking world. Martin's work has been featured in numerous exhibitions and publications, both nationally and internationally, including the 2022 Venice Biennale. And she continues to explore the complex layers of identity and experiences, celebrating the powerful legacy of African American women. And Luke Williams is a scholar, artist, organizer, and critic of 20th and 21st century Black performance and visual cultures. His work, which spans embodiment, portraiture, racial capitalism, Afrofuturism, and the aesthetics of Black radical imagination, focuses on Black diasporic art in the Americas and the broader Atlantic world. Luke is a PhD candidate in modern thought and literature at Stanford University, and his dissertation in the Black Figures of Racial Capitalism explores the practices of 4 Black emerging artists in the California Bay Area as they navigate the pressures of racial capitalism in the art market. Currently, he is a curatorial fellow here at MoAD and a Diversifying Academia Recruiting Excellence Fellow at Stanford University. Please join me in welcoming our guest today.
All right. Nia, thank you for the generous introduction. It's so kind. I'm so happy to be here today with our artists, and I'm so happy that you are here with us as well. It's really a gift, and it's going to be a terrific talk. I can already tell. We've got great energy up here, and so I can guarantee you that you will get your money's worth. Before I pass it off to our artists to introduce their work and talk about their process to give us some context for our conversation today, I did want to share a few thoughts about what Spectrum means to me, why we're gathered here today, and the significance of some of the questions that we can draw from the importance of color. Some of you may have been hoping to see Kijo Lee moderate this conversation. I know she was very excited to be in conversation with our artists and unfortunately could not be here, but I'm an educator and I'm of the firm belief that the best way to honor your teacher is to keep the conversation going after they have left the classroom. So I hope that's something that we can do today to honor Kijo Lee and all of the good work that she has put in for this exhibition. And so my thoughts on color really start with a perhaps assumption about what the importance of African diasporic art might be. And some people might be of the persuasion. I'm sure no one here in this room thinks this, but some people might think that the importance or what Black art has to offer is only in the vehicle of political art, art that resists explicitly or tries to counter Western art. But I think what we find when we think about the importance of color is an expansion of what Black art means and what it can be. For in my own experience, my own learning, I started to think about the importance of color to Black experience through the literature of Toni Morrison and Alice Walker. Toni Morrison, who describes Pilate as a woman who is Black, blue Black, purple Black, of having a near mystical quality and a dangerous power. Alice Walker, who writes about Celie, who discovers aspects of God through the color purple and in the beauty of everyday life. So when we think about what color can teach us and even represent, it can have that spiritual element, I think, and I hope we get to talk about that today. And when we think about the color Black, we can't only think about Black as a constant or a simple definition. Black as a pigment contains all the colors of the rainbow. It, as we were reminded of the diaspora, it is a multicolored experience, and we see it in all shades. And yet Black is also the absence of light. So when we talk about optics, wavelengths, the math behind how we see and experience, Black is also the reminder of the shadows, of the chaotic, of the creative space. So we can go there as well. And in the absence of light, perhaps you've seen, there's a documentary that came out recently, a terrific documentary about David Driscoll and the curatorial experience of, 2 centuries of Black American art. It's a wonderful documentary, highly recommend it. And it's about capturing the experience of the artists and curators who are not seeking to define Black experience through a single definition or lens, but to offer a range, a spectrum, if you will, of how to see and experience. And I think we get to build on that tradition today and be here in conversation in that spirit. So that's what I'm bringing to the table. I'm really glad that we have so many fruitful questions to dive in. So I will make way for what you're all here to actually see and hear, the people who are here for. And I'll kick it off to Tawny first.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tawny Chatmon. I am happy to be here with you this evening. I debated I told Delita I probably should say this, that before I came here, about a week ago, I sustained a head injury. So my kids are bringing to my attention that I'm saying things like shoe instead of paint. So if I do that, just bear with me and just go with it and just be like, try give me some grace. But I am a photography-based artist. And by that, I mean that the work starts off as photographs, usually of my children, my nieces, my nephews, my godchildren, and other family members. And after the work is refined and printed, I embellish the work with 24 karat gold leaf, semi-precious stones, glass, paper, and the work becomes an entirely new expression. And I guess it's important to also talk about why I create the work that I create. My mom will say I was always an artist. I've always been a maker. I made collages, books, things like that. But growing up, I thought I would have a career in dramatic arts. And I got a small scholarship for dramatic arts and went to school and decided that's not for me. And I quit abruptly. And needing to find some other way to make money, my boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband, suggested I try my hand at photography because it was something that I was already into and liked and loved. And so in the beginning, I was shooting for monetary purposes. And when I was about 25, I gave birth to my son and started to focus on children. In 2010, I'm sorry, I'll go back. After that, I was doing commercial photography. So I was shooting for companies like Until There's a Cure, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Kids, the YMCA. And in 2010, my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And he and I decided that I would document his battle with prostate cancer. We thought we would have a story to inspire Black men, especially, to take prostate cancer seriously. What ended up happening is I photographed prostate cancer taking my father's life. And after that, my life changed. What I wanted to do with my time here changed. I started thinking about myself as a daughter without my father, who's now navigating the world, and thinking about what that means for my kids, that one day they would live here without me. And so I started paying attention to things in the world, things that were bothering me. And so I started seeing stories about Black children being sent home from school because of their hairstyles, paying attention to visiting museums with my children, noticing we have to walk forever before we see faces that look like ours, our family members, and just a lot of things just kind of started piling on, and I just started making. And so this series is the Redemption series. So the work is in response to those policies in place. And so in this series, I'm celebrating our hair a lot. And I am telling Black children, I'm telling the viewers of my work that our hair is beautiful. These hairstyles are beautiful and precious, and the sitters of my work are special. And so this series was directly influenced by Gustav Klimt's Golden Phase. And I wanted the viewer of this series to have the same feeling that I felt when I first viewed this work, and those were feelings of regality and beauty. And so those are the feelings I wanted to evoke in the viewer of that series. And this is an image of my children, my husband, my mother, and I visiting the Minneapolis Institute of Art, where this piece of my daughter is in between master artists of the past. And that's what I wanted my children to see. That's what I want Black children to see when we visit museums. So this was a very special moment for me. And as Luke mentioned, the Venice Biennale, both Delita and I had work in the African Futurist Manifesto, Redefining Blackness, during the Biennale. And that's a time where visiting the different cathedrals in Venice kind of pushed me more to focus on gold, to dive deeper into the meaning of gold and religious mosaics. And so we know that historically, when we see gold, we know that we are supposed to view this as precious, as special, as important. Historically, gold was reserved for those of importance. So that's what I'm saying to the viewer of my work, that my sitters are precious, they're special, they're important. And so here, the piece that is in this exhibition, you'll see that the work has pivoted to more of a Byzantine art influence, religious iconography influence. And I wanted to share a process video of myself creating that piece. And so the background is painted with strokes of gold, and the tiles that make up their dresses are paper tiles. Because I work with photography, if I get paint on my subject's face or anywhere on her or him, I have to push the work aside. I can no longer use it. So I've spent hours of doing the work, and I have all, this work that's pushed to the side. And so I began to cut those discarded works into tiny tiles, which I created their paper mosaic garments from. And so as this series moves along, the viewer will see iconographic portraits of historical Black figures embedded into my subject's work. And so this is a piece that I recently completed, and this is my son. And so there are about 5,500 golden strokes in the back. And so with religious iconography, the iconographers of the past, the works were viewed as literal prayers and conduits to the heavens. And so with each stroke, I said a prayer or set an intention for my son, for Black children, my daughters, and all children, and really the world. So there are 5,500 plus prayers in this piece. And I wanted to also talk about the titles. While I've always been intentional with the titles of the works, I'm now titling them in a way that not only is this my prayer and my hope for my son, but also as you read it, you are also setting that intention as well. And so that's where we are now. And that's the latest piece that I have completed. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Delita Martin, mixed media printmaking artist based in Texas. Thank you all for coming tonight, and special thanks to the museum and everyone for having us. I have chosen several different projects that I've worked on over the last couple of years that I'm going to go through with you, but I want to give you a little bit of, my background and my history in art. So I grew up in Conroe, Texas, where you did not see, I think I had my first African-American teacher, probably my first and only African-American teacher in like 4th grade. So I didn't get an opportunity to see a lot of work that looked like me. And so at the time, my father was an artist, and I really didn't understand what he did and how important that was to me until I was much older. Because I tell people all the time, I grew up in an art school because my grandmothers were quilt makers. Everyone was storytellers. There were writers in my family. My father was a visual artist. My grandfather was an artist, and he carved, did wood carvings. And so creating was something that we just did every single day. And I was always encouraged to create. So it was kind of like, that's just what you did. And so at the age of 5, I decided I was going to be an artist. I had no clue what that meant at all. No one told me about the pay at the time. but I remember sitting in my kindergarten class, and I was trying to blend crayon colors. And my teacher told the other students, Delita's using such wonderful colors, you should go by and just kind of get some ideas. And so I look up and there's this entire line of my classmates walking by my desk looking at my paper, and I was like, this must be what an artist is. So therefore, I am an artist. And so on top of that, my parents always introduced me as their baby, and they would always say, and she's our artist. And so there was never a question in my mind as to what I would do with my life. I just didn't know the when, what, where, and how of it. I just knew what the end result would be. So I started off at Texas Southern University, where I received a BFA in drawing, and this is by no means true, but in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm done with drawing. I've done everything I can do with drawing. It doesn't make any sense. Not true. But printmaking was the next step for me. It just made sense. So I never made prints in my entire life. I happened to go into the art building on a Saturday after a night of partying to pick up my drawing pad. And Dr. John Biggers was in our printmaking room. And my professor, Harvey Johnson, who was one of his mentees, Charles Kreiner, a printmaker also in Houston, along with Early Hutnall, photographer. And Early was photographing. Dr. Biggers was sitting at the table signing prints. And Harvey and Kreiner were at the press, and one was wiping, the other was rolling. And I snuck in and I sat down and I watched this incredible dance. It was like magic. And I'm looking at the table at all these complicated chemicals and all of these supplies, but there was this beautiful image that was being printed that was so soft and so intense in meaning and in the way it felt. And I made a mental note to myself. I said, I'm going to do that one day. So fast forward, get married, have a kid. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go back to graduate school. Well, I'm going to go to graduate school. I'm going to be a printmaker. And I was that one person in class that was like, and everybody was like, oh God, here she goes. Because I did not have a background in printmaking. So I would sit in on undergraduate class during the day to learn process, and I would work at night. And so that's kind of my beginning in the printmaking world. So around, I'd say 2013, 2014, my husband suggested that I become a full-time artist. He's like, you should do it while we have the opportunity. And he says to me, you know, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to live out your dream, or you're going to have some great stories to tell our kids and grandkids. And so I'm like, okay, well now I have both. But it was a pretty incredible experience, because I had to figure out how to be an artist, how to be the artist that I was meant to be. And that's where my journey began. So I'm going to walk you through some of the projects. This is a book project that I did. This project, very quick story. My father and I, we had a running joke that I had to do everything he told me until I was 21. Just before I turned 21, or I was about to turn 21, my father was murdered. And so every year for a solid year, I dreamed about him. And in one particular dream, I was looking for him, and I was in the middle of a road, and I laid down and I was so sad, and a group of blackbirds came down and picked me up and carried me away. And so I wrote the dream down and I kept it in a journal, and I've always often wondered what it meant, you know, how can I utilize it in my work? And so this past year, I created a book based on that dream. And I wrote a poem called This Side of Night. And so this is one of the pages from the book. And I was able to debut the book weekend of his birthday, last October. And so So here are some shots of the books. So each of the books, if you're familiar with my work, I work in what I call varied editions. So I'll have my edition numbers are usually low. There are 10 books, but each book is different. So no two books are alike. The cover of the books are also the moon that you see on the cover. The placement of each book is different as well. This is a piece that was actually created during the time that the work that you'll see here in the museum was created. And it was a really tough time during the pandemic. I lost my mother, and within a month later, I lost my brother due to COVID. And so this was a self-portrait of me, and I did a lot of self-portraits during that time, because I was at a point where I couldn't see myself and I needed to figure out where I was. And in order to do that, I did self-portraits, and it really was able to help me work through that time. This is another piece. The piece that you see on the right is another self-portrait from that time. The other piece is a really good friend of mine that I did. And again, lots of layers in the work. So I've also been I'm always interested in how to push the boundaries of printmaking and in what I can do and how I can do it. And this is a shot in the studio where I did a project with Project Row Houses. It was called Your Blues Ain't Like Mine. And a group that I show with every year, Rue, myself, Lovey Olivia, Rebea Bain, and Ann Johnson, we show as Rue. We do a show every couple of years together. We've been together for years. Well, we created an installation in that Project Row House, and these were the walls that were being installed for that project. And this is me actually installing with my assistant in the space. And so the whole idea of this was this is my first installation, and it was a really small scale installation because I wasn't quite sure what to do, because I don't do sketches or anything like that. I just kind of like to go straight for it. And so this was me going straight for it. I recently opened my first retrospective, January 26th, and this is a plate installation. So this installation has been set up, I want to say 3 or 4 different times, but the thing about the installation is that every installation is different. No installation is the same. And this came about, I was actually very intrigued with Judy Chicago's Dinner Party, but it felt a little exclusive, you know? And so it was brilliant and on one hand, but on the other hand, I was like, I don't feel invited. And so I'm like, how can I create a space where I can feel welcome and others can feel welcome? And so this was a project that just kind of grew and grew and grew, in that it was initially going to be family. And then I had to decide, what does family really mean? And so it ended up being, I wanted to know what it would feel like to be in a room surrounded by 300 women that have impacted me in some shape, form, or fashion. And so every single plate, there are 300 plates total. Most of the installations have been at least 150 of the plates, maybe a little bit more. But I was like, what does that feel like? And how can I invite others to come to the table? And so I got the idea to add an 8-foot table and invite people to actually sit down and have conversations. And some of the most wonderful experiences and exchanges have happened at that very table. This is an installation that went along with the retrospective. And so the patterns and textures that you see in the backgrounds of my work are called veilscapes, and that's the spirit world. And so I wanted to have a different conversation about about this spiritual space. How can I bring that to life? How can I activate a space where the viewer can come in and be a part of the veilscape? And so this is several, I believe it's 12 pieces of work total, and they are all unframed pieces. The works are shaped and they're hung on the wall, and the walls were painted as well. These are some of the early works that were on loan for the exhibition. And so I was contacted by Rice University. Again, during the pandemic, they had a lot of temporary classrooms. And so they were trying to figure out a way to inspire students and the community during this time when we're like totally isolated. So I proposed to them an outdoor meditation space, a space where people can come together but be distanced enough but still feel a connection. And so this piece is called The Gathering. And it was fantastic because we were able to create a platform in relationship to the mural itself. And the pattern from the background came out into the landscape. And students were able to come and have their lunch, and people in the community could come and actually enjoy the work. This is the piece that you see here in the exhibition, and again, this piece was created during the time when my mother passed away, and thinking about color and thinking about blood as life, and being comforted by the ancestors in your spirit world, and this is what that piece is really about.
Amazing. Wow. Thank you both. I mean, wonderful to hear about your work, about the process, about all of the care and attention to detail that goes into every step of what you're making, how you're making, and why you're making. I want to start off with maybe a simple question, because we're going to get into some exciting questions. Maybe it's not simple, but for two artists working in such rich colors, do you have a favorite color, and why?
Yes, blue is my favorite color. Blue has always been a spiritual color for me. It's always been a color of God for me. And I didn't realize that until I was much older, and you're doing those self-critiques, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's blue in everything that I do. One of the fascinating things, like I don't think I really realized how entrenched blue was in my work until my father passed away. And we went back and we were looking at pictures from the funeral, and we were all in navy blue. And the casket was a beautiful light blue, and the flowers were blue. And it was something we never noticed until after the fact. And that just kind of was the confirmation that I needed to understand that this was, a color that was very important to me in my work.
That's a really interesting question, because my favorite color I thought was orange, but orange is nowhere in my work. So that's really an interesting question. And my least favorite color, which is red, is in my work a lot, which is really interesting. So maybe orange is not my favorite color, but that's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
No, absolutely. That's so interesting, because, like, for me at least, when I'm making, whether it's writing or performing, sometimes that space is not always the representation of my favorite things. Sometimes it's just the space where I need to transform whatever it is that I'm working in into something else. So sometimes it's not the favorite, that actually comes up.
It's funny because I use blue to actually darken colors rather than using black. And so it's like very much a part. And you know, how you get in the studio and you're working and you know, you're feeling off. Blue always centers me. So even just doing a monochromatic drawing or just working with the color has a way of centering me.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, we've touched on it already, but the ability of color, whether it's the uses of light and how the glimmer of that pigment can capture light and change light, can really have profound effects in the process of making it, in the process of seeing it. Do you find that your relationships to the work that you make changes, or maybe is just different from when you're making it to when you see it afterwards, to when you see it in a gallery space? How does your relationship to the colors that you use or the images that you make change throughout stages of the process?
I don't, now that you're asking that, I don't think it changes. I think that in my mind, I'll have this idea of what I'm going to make and what this is going to look like. And the work usually takes me a very long time to complete because I'm working on, well, now with the iconography series, I'm just working on one piece and that's taking me months to complete. But before, I was working on maybe 6 pieces at a time because there's so many different layers. There's acrylic paint, I have to wait for that to dry. And then there's the size to adhere the gold leaf, and I have to wait for that process. So I'm bouncing from piece to piece. So even if I go into it thinking that this piece is gonna look this way, over time, because of everything that's going on in the world, and I'm working and all of these emotions that I'm having are going into the piece, it changes. But it still feels the same from the beginning to the end to seeing it framed and hanging. So I don't think anything changes, even though the idea changes, but my relationship with it doesn't.
For me, I like to work really intuitively. So when I go into the studio, I don't have a plan. As far as I may say, okay, I want to work with the full figure, or I think I'm only going to work with just the portrait. That's about as much planning as I do. And because the work is so large and it's so physical to create, so there's the printmaking element of it, there's the painting element of it, there's the drawing element of it, and the work is typically anywhere from 6 foot and larger. There's an intimacy that happens because I'm working on the floor. So I'm sitting on the piece, I'm standing on the piece, I'm physically touching every aspect of it, and there's an intimacy there that is necessary for the work to evolve. So I don't have expectations. I allow the work to work through me.
I think intimacy is such a great word to think about the relationship that you build with the image that you're creating. And for both of you who are creating images that not only represent but honor subjects in the image, I'm wondering if you can talk about the relationship of honoring slow form, what it means to create an icon or create someone in a position of almost sainthood, to create someone in a position of memoriam, but to do it in a way that it takes hundreds of hours, right? Sometimes it can seem in our society today that you honor someone for an hour, a cool hour, and then once church is over, right? Like, all right, moving on, Super Bowl Sunday, right? Like, on to the next thing. So what does it mean to have such an intimate relationship to honoring in a long process?
My mentor once told me that anyone can draw a bowl, but an artist makes it a vessel. He said, you never draw anything that you don't know anything about, or draw anything that you're not willing to learn about, because it is your responsibility as the artist to bring it to life. And so, again, going back to that intimacy that happens in the work and that relationship that builds between the creator and the created, you have to, in my mind and in my practice, I have to allow myself to be open enough to do that. And so it's a way of, I guess, being a vessel, in a sense, of allowing these works to come to life, to honor these individuals, because I'm very much interested in the essence of a person. I questioned early on in my art career, why are you always doing these portraits of women? Why are you, little girls and women in particular? And I remember going to visit the artist Jean Lacy in Dallas, Texas, and there's a portrait of her that was done by Dr. Biggers. And it looked nothing like her, but you instantly knew who it was because he had captured her spirit. And so I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I want to capture this. I have no interest in being a photographic artist. That's wonderful and that's great and it has its place. But for me, I want to capture your spirit. I want to capture that twinkle in your eye that the most intimate person to you understands, but maybe no one else sees.
Mm-hmm. I think I forgot the question, but I'm going to try to go with it. So I think that because I am creating works that feature my children, my family members, the work is already intimate, and it's also my hopes and dreams for my children. And so I'll tell a story about my son. He's 19 now, but when he was 17, my sister was spending the night at the house, and she comes running upstairs like at 5 a.m. She's like, Boobity's not in the room. Boobity is my son. That's his nickname. She's like, Boobity's not in the room. I'm like, well, where is he? So I go in his room and I see what looks like his body in the bed. So I'm like, Boobity. He doesn't answer. I go over, pull the covers back, and it's pillows, right? So I'm like, oh, he snuck out. So, I'm kind of having laughs. I'm still irritated that he snuck out. But what really frightened me was when I saw him walking home. And he had on a black hoodie. And we had just moved into this neighborhood that is predominantly white. He had snuck out of my basement, obviously, in the middle of the night. So when we speak to him, he says that he was fine. I just had on a hoodie. I had a knife in my pocket to protect myself. And I called an Uber by TD Bank. And I'm like, you're a black boy walking out of this basement in this brand new neighborhood with a black hoodie by a bank with a knife. And so, it really scared me. And I thought back on Trayvon Martin and his hoodie. And so I have this piece that's titled In Your Hoodie or Your White Tee. And he is depicted, my son, he's depicted in this hoodie that is adorned and it's beautiful. And he has on these golden pants. And it was my attempt to say, hey, look at my son. Look at him. Look at the hoodie this way. He's beautiful. He's precious. He's special. So really, when I'm creating all of these things, it's already going to be intimate because I'm trying to say to the world that my son is special. He's precious. let them be, leave them alone, let them make mistakes. So I think because these are my babies, these are my children, these are my hopes for Black children, my children, the work is just intimate already within itself.
Absolutely. Something that's occurred, I think, in our conversation that has been touched on a few different times, thinking about manifesting, thinking about spiritual access, thinking about transformation. I want to throw a word out here, see if it resonates, and then maybe follow up with another question. I'm thinking about magic, the ability to create something that was not there. I think artists are magicians in that way. Artists are able to look at 1 + 1 and make it equal 3, make something impossible. And so I want to ask this question about magic, if it resonates. What is something that an artist might understand, something that you've learned in your process of magic making, that people who maybe don't have a creative practice or don't think of themselves as having a creative practice could learn about magic, manifesting, or making possible?
The difference between looking and seeing.
Care to elaborate?
Again, it's one thing to look at something, but it's a totally different thing to see it. And when you see something, you understand it, you feel it, you smell it, you taste it, you do all of these things. And I don't mean literally, but figuratively. There are times when I've walked into museums and galleries, and the work just speaks to me. It resonates so deeply in my soul because I can see it. I'm not just looking at it. I'm visually seeing it. So,
yeah. I think that maybe working artists, the magic that we have is that we remembered who we are. I think we're all creators. I think we're makers, but some of us forget, and then some of us don't. So I think that the ones that are still creating and call themselves artists were able to hold on to that magic, and others just kind of have to find it, but we all have it. Whether we're making change, whatever it is, we're here to make. And we just have to remember that. I think that we just remembered it somehow along the way.
Mm. I'm so glad you mentioned the element of work in all of this. What it means to create not only as an orientation towards the world, but as a profession, as a means of living. There are many ways to have a means of living. Some occupations or perceptions of occupation and how we choose to do our work, in my opinion, can make us forget that element of creation. We can learn how to work, but not how to make. So I wonder if you can touch on maybe the nuts and bolts, the brass tacks of what it means to be an artist, to make a living, to support yourself, support others who depend on you, and how to balance the monetary with the magnificent.
I don't believe in balance. There is no balance. There are days when I'm killing it in the studio and I'm just not that wife that gets in to make dinner or that mom that's at the dinner table. And then there are other times when I suck in the studio and I'm like mom of the year, And I think the key with that is accepting it and being okay with it and showing yourself grace. And I feel like as artists, we don't give ourselves permission and the grace to be who we're supposed to be and be the person we're supposed to be or the artist that we're supposed to be. And so I have found that accepting that lack of balance and understanding what that really looks like has brought peace to me.
Mm. Mm.
I think I'll piggyback off of that and then also say there is a quote that's attributed to Aristotle. I always say, I don't even know if he said this because Google will tell you somebody said something. I didn't say it, but it is one quote, a quote that changed my life really, and it goes, where the needs of the world and your talents meet, therein lies your vocation. Therein lies your purpose. So I think that's how you balance the two. And like Delita said, there really isn't a balance. But I think that once people find where their natural talents are and the needs of the world, that's really why you're here. Because I think we forget we're all a part of the same thing. We're all creations of the Spirit of the Most High. And we're here to do something. And when you find the needs of the world and your talent, you can also make money from that sometimes. Maybe sometimes you won't make that much, but still, I think that's your purpose. I think that's how you find what you're meant to do while you're here. And I really have no idea if that was your question, but I think.
No, this is great. I mean, y'all better get me on my soapbox here. I got some thoughts, because it is an unpopular opinion at the moment to suggest that people should seek or embrace even lack of balance. We see everywhere, we need work-life balance. We see we need to find spiritual balance within ourselves. We see you need to balance your relationships, balance your time. And I think these are valid ways of thinking about how to pursue health in one's life. I'm not gonna knock that, but what it seems like is going on in this conversation here is embracing the creative potential of imbalance. And when we think about the physical realm in which we live, like thermodynamics and stuff, when things reach absolute balance, that's zero creative potential. It's the imbalance that has the potential for movement, for heat distribution, for making things happen. So in the same way that the absence of light, the shadow, the void is the chaotic space, which is also the creative space, it seems like what you're also suggesting is that imbalance is the relationship of potential to make that happen.
I mean, most people don't equate imbalance to truth, but that's what it is. I mean, it's the truth of what life is, you know? And, you know, I always tell people, you know, when I'm always asked, well, what advice would you give to emerging artists or young students? I'm like, you have to figure out who you are as an artist, and you have to be happy with it. And not mom, not dad, not your sister, not boyfriend, girlfriend. It doesn't matter. You have to be happy with it. And from there, your next step is to figure out the vision of who you want to be as that particular artist. So, you know, I'm like, all right, I want to be a full-time artist. I want to be a studio artist. These are the things that I want to do. Who is out there that's doing that thing? And I researched them to death, you know, and it was like, okay, well, who's in your circle? Where was your first exhibition? Who are you hanging out with now? What were the steps that you took? And some of those things you can, glean off the information you need and discard the rest. You're not going to be able to have an identical life, but those are some prompts there that you can take and really use to establish who you are. But again, there's no such thing as balance, in my opinion, but there is truth.
I'll pass the question that you brought up because I think it's a great one. Advice for emerging artists in terms of the wisdom you've gained in your own process, things that you would hope they could learn as well while they find theirs.
I think it leads me back to the quote that I just mentioned, that question. But I also think that I don't know how to say this, but I think that, I guess I don't know how to responsibly say this, but there's no really young people, no super young people in here. So I think I can, so I'll say that nothing I ever did where money was my motive ever felt good to me, ever. And when I started to make this work, I really had no idea what would happen. I really just quit again, commercial photography. I told my husband, I can't do this. I don't know why I'm chasing after these jobs. I know that while my father was battling prostate cancer, he said to me, the way that you're calling these hospitals and companies for me to try to get me this treatment that I need, I want you to go after your clients that same way. And so I did spend a year doing that, and I felt empty. And it just felt like, why? Why do I want these clients? What for? Why did I want them on my resume? And I think it was to prove that I had a real career at that time, because I'm self-taught in photography. I'm self-taught in everything that I do. And so when I just quit and I said, I can't do this, my husband said, okay. But I think he was still kind of worried a little bit, but he still was like, okay. And when I started making and sharing, I had no idea I was going to get the response that I got. But I guess I'll say what I said, when I was chasing jobs for money or for notoriety or to have these names on my list, and I didn't feel good. It only felt good when I did what came from my heart. So I don't know if that's a responsible thing to tell an emerging artist because they have bills to pay, but I feel comfortable saying that in this group.
Yeah, but I appreciate that because the practical reality of it is in the imbalance, you will be juggling a lot of different demands, period. Some of them financial. I do want to take an opportunity to recognize the place that we are in, specifically the salon and the significance for the Museum of the African Diaspora. So this is the area that we use to show work by emerging artists. These are EAP, Emerging Artist Program Fellows. This is work by Lushan AZ titled Eugene's Cove. And so frequently when you come into this space, not only for programs, but a normal day, you'll see work on the walls by artists who are attempting to do just that. They're on the cusp of figuring out that vocation of what it looks like to be a professional artist and how they make ends meet while still making the work that they want to make. I'm really proud to be the curatorial fellow who works with the emerging artists, and I appreciate the support that MoAD provides towards helping artists realize that vision. So thank you for speaking to the pragmatics. I want to be sensitive of our time. I know our audience has wonderful questions that we'll keep the conversation going. I have one last one that I would like to ask for the both of you. We've talked a lot about what has inspired you up to this point, of how your process, making the work, making magic, embracing imbalance. What is the manifestation that you are taking with you for tomorrow? Who's the artist you want to be tomorrow?
I was asked a similar question to that once, and I made up some answer. But
you can do that again.
But no, I did go. It was an important question. I was asked, "What do you want your legacy to be?" And I made something up, in all honesty. But I was like, "Wow, that was like a really profound question." But what I realized was that Elizabeth Catlett, John Biggers, I've looked at Gustav, Jim Dine, Motherwell, all of these artists filled a particular space for me in my learning, in my development. I want to be for other artists what those artists were for me. So in any way that I can help, I can give back. Whatever I can do to reach over, reach back, reach down, and pull somebody up with me, that's what I want to do.
I love that. What she said. But I think that I just want to make good use of the rest of the years that I have here. And I want my kids to know that. I want my kids to know that I made use of the 50 years that I had left to contribute to a better world for them. And so I think that's what I want my legacy to be.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you both. Thank you for your time. How about we open up the conversation for the folks in the audience? We have a microphone here with Nia, and I would love to hear your thoughts and questions.
Hi, thank you so much for coming, Wow. Thank you so much for having this event and for taking the time to speak. My name is Grayson Fling. I am a aspiring costume designer, and I wanted to provide a comment and a question. So you had mentioned that you use a lot of blues, that your favorite color is blues, and I can see the spiritual undertones of that with baptism and you constantly having to be reborn in some way, like in some form because of the things that you've endured. And then you talked about how you don't usually like the color red, but as an aspiring costume designer, I consider red to be a disruptor. We see it with Suge in the color purple when she comes out in her sparkling red dress. So I challenge you to shift your perspective on that, because I really like the way in which you use the color red and the awakening, and you use the wardrobe artist Isabel Philogene, is that how you properly say her last name? So I challenge you to change your perspective on that. That was my comment. But my question is, in what ways has your creative process evolved since you first created, so since you were first children? And how do you still cater to your inner child today?
Good question.
So for me, I was told I think I was about maybe 5th or 6th grade, my art teacher told me that I was using color incorrectly, and she didn't explain to me how. But it was very embarrassing, actually. So I stayed away from color until graduate school. Honestly, everything just went to black and white drawings. And so when I got into graduate school, they wanted you to experiment. So I was like, I'm gonna play with color, and I lost my mind. But I feel like, it's a daily struggle, because I'm constantly telling myself, this is your space to tell a story, your story. You are inviting others in, and they are welcome, but you do not have to paint the picture that someone else wants you to paint. And so I tell myself that. Sometimes I forget, I'm human, I forget, but that has been very freeing for me. I became an artist the day I stopped caring what people told me to do. Yeah.
So I think that the way that I was creating growing up until now kind of all collided with each other. Like I mentioned, I was always making collages and things like that, and I had a history in dramatic arts, and so the costume design kind of made its way in there as well. I grew up in Germany, and so, well, I was from kindergarten till 6th grade. And so our field trips were to castles, and so the gold frames kind of made their way into the work as well. I used to go to work with my mom, and I'm really aging myself, but I used to use Microsoft Paint on her computer. And so I taught myself all of these things, and then when I had something to say that my voice wasn't able to say, all of those practices collided to create the work that I'm making today.
I still use Microsoft Paint. Are we not using that anymore? Does the trick.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and you guys are absolutely magical. It's a real thrill to be in front of you here. I want to ask you, as an artist, how you look at influence versus copying and finding your own style. So I find that, I see a lot of artists. I've been blessed on Instagram to, become friends with people, look at their styles, see what they're doing, go to museums. I see, your influence with Klimt. What is that line, and how do you use those things to kind of find your own voice?
So when I started out, I learned to draw through copying. I copied every John Biggers picture I could find, okay? But eventually I found myself, and I understand that young artists are going to copy in order to find who they are as artists. It just happens. It just is. We've all done it, and it's going to continue to happen. As an artist, I do not have the energy or the time to police you. People know who did what and why and how. I'm not dealing with that. There are some cases that do need to be addressed, and that's fine. But for the most part, I'm not putting that I'm too busy trying to create to police.
Yeah. I think copying comes with sneaking, right? Like Delita said, if someone is paying homage to you or someone, then they're going to mention that. If they don't, then we might be teetering the lines of you're copying and trying to get away with it. That's how I kind of view it. For me, also, although the work is influenced by Gustav Klimt, I've noticed that anything that's gold, people make that connection. They don't go back to Byzantine art, who Klimt was also influenced by. But so I think the difference between copying and paying homage is integrity and intention, and what are you trying to do with that?
Because no one creates in a vacuum. You can't. There's just, people look at my work and you can see John Biggers in the work. You can see, Harvey Johnson in the work. You can see Elizabeth Catlett in the work. And, I've looked at them extensively over the years to learn from them, but I've also found my own voice. So my, response to artists who have, so I've gotten phone calls from people that say, hey, is this your work? Someone's, copying your work. I mean, that's an opportunity to have a conversation with someone to say, hey, I'm really flattered. What were you thinking? Or, just to have the conversation to figure it out, to help them, but not in the accusatory way. I'm not coming at you, but I mean, it's an opportunity for everyone to have a conversation and to learn from each other at that point. So, but I can't police.
I've also received messages from people saying, hey, this person is using gold in their work too. And I'm like, great. I did not invent gold, and no, so great. Good luck to them.
An element that I hear in the question as well is the importance of mentorship. And it sounds like what I'm hearing here is when we look to our models, our role models, we're not necessarily looking to copy the objects they create. We're looking to copy their integrity, their approach, who they are as people. And that can be another way of thinking about how do we find our own voice while learning through imitation, through copying, is thinking about what are we copying? Do we just want the object? Or do we want to learn from how they are as people in order to create our own objects?
I think part of my question was kind of how do you use those influences? How much do you how much importance do you put on looking at those things, pulling those into your art, trying to work with it as a way to?
I think you can't avoid doing it. I don't think. It was very important for me to look at Dr. Biggers, but before I had the understanding that I have, I was deliberately copying because I was trying to learn, and it was more about techniques. But then it became the understanding came. So then I'm listening to interviews, I'm reading articles, I'm doing the deep dive to understand why you're doing what you did. Why are the turtles in your work? Why, is the quilt so important? So understanding that, so at that point I'm no longer copying you, I'm paralleling you. So I'm looking at my own life to say, okay, well, John Biggers did this for this thing because he wanted to talk about this. How do I talk about that but have it in my language from my time period? So those are the questions that you begin to ask, but that comes with maturity. So that's why, if I see someone, for the most part, if someone's copying me, then, whatever.
First of all, both of your work is really beautiful.
Thank you.
So thank you for being here and sharing. Both of you made extensive use of family members in terms of photographs, and then I don't know if they sat as models, but certainly you made extensive use. So I'm curious, how did they feel about that at the beginning, and did you encounter any interesting anecdotes in terms of convincing them to, if not sit, at least be a subject? And then secondly, after they've seen the final product, has that changed their reaction to it?
So yes, I ask my kids, will you sit for me? My son, he went through a phase where he wanted to, and then I'd say when he was 15, 16, he was like, no, thank you. And then he saw Beyonce acquire a work. All of these other celebrities acquire a work, and now he all of a sudden wants to be back in my work. My middle daughter, she will always say yes. My younger daughter, she's something else. Okay, she is the one that you saw in the piece that's hanging in the Minneapolis Institute of Art. She said to me, "That's my last time sitting for you. I can't be too famous anymore." She also has stipulations. She has a scar on her mouth and on her cheek. And she tells me if that's not showing, I cannot use her. I can't use her. So I have to make sure that her scars are showing. She wants to be paid more now. And her last thing was that she can no longer pose in dresses. So that's going to be really interesting to see. You're going to see her in dresses, and then now I'm working on a piece where she has on pants. She's even gone to, she wants to wear a tuxedo in my work. So there will be a story to tell. But and then another sitter, I won't, when she gets older, she can tell her story on her own. But she went through a phase where she was being bullied. And she's in a lot of my work. And now you cannot tell her anything. So she loves it. She tells people she's a model. Some of the kids, like my nephew, I added golden tears. He saw it and he said, "Hey, I wasn't crying." So there's a lot of different reactions. But my kids are, especially the youngest, she's the funniest.
It's been really interesting. I think the most notable is the plate installation. So I initially started asking people to participate, and it kind of turned into like a social science project in a way, because I realized that a lot of people don't like the way they look. And I found that so strange. So I would ask people to pose for me, and initially it was like, send me pictures. Well, they were so photoshopped and so filtered. I was like, I can't do this. So then it was like, well, come to the studio and I'll photograph you. And that turned into, wait, let me see. No, that's not the right angle. Let's do it over. And so it was so frustrating. I stopped asking. And so I just started asking people to hang out with me. And I would just photograph them without them knowing. And I didn't tell them they were going to be in the project. Even telling them they would be in the project, it's like all these questions constantly. So I just stopped telling them that they were in the project. So I would either hang out with them and take their photograph, or just go onto Instagram and just take what I wanted. And so, so it was really interesting to see the reactions of people who saw themselves in the plate installation. They were like, "Oh my gosh." So what I found was that every single person wanted to know why they were included. What was that one moment that I remembered enough about them to put them in the installation?
Delita, I am not a lawyer, but I think you need to get some waivers signed.
Well, they smiled. That's my answer. You had an opportunity there.
Thank you. This has been a really illuminating conversation. Thank you for moderating it, and thank you for being here. Your work is just absolutely beautiful and excellent. A very straightforward question for you, and that is, what kinds of things have you learned about yourselves in your art? What kinds of qualities and things about you have you learned during the creative process? Thank you.
Interesting, you should ask that. For me, I think at the very core of my work, it's about identity. And I think what I have learned is that I'm always searching for myself in my work. So
I think I learned I'm a very emotional being, and that I cry a lot. I think that's the biggest thing that I learned about myself, is that I am very emotional. And that creating, I didn't know it before, but it is really a way of healing. Healing yourself, whether it be for that moment or just, I don't know, but that's really what I learned about myself.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question for Delita, if I may ask about the printing techniques and whether using one particular is influenced by the use of any particular color. Do you feel limited as for the use of color because of particular techniques, or is it an open field that's not existent in any other techniques that enhances color, for example? What's that play between the material aspect and the process and the use of color?
So my process is, if I can't draw it, I'll print it. If I can't print it, I'll paint it. If I can't paint it, I'll collage it. So it became, I guess, when I left the university to be a full-time artist, I wanted to get into the studio, and it was about being a creator and not about being a printmaker. I identify as a printmaker, but I am not limited to printmaking processes. So I enjoy the freedom of being able to, again, identify as a printmaker, but be able to create in a way that I want to create. I felt very free being able to do that. I don't feel limited by any process, because I don't have a problem with throwing something in if it doesn't work. Switching processes, rather, if it doesn't work. I enjoy the layering. The layering talks about history. It talks about time. It talks about the creation of the piece. So I'm always happy, because every printmaking process sits on paper differently. So you're able to distinguish between the layers and everything that happens.
I'd like to know what's your take on the rise of AI, where you can sit at a computer and put in a description and you get a painting. And would you call that art?
Oh. About to get us banned. For me personally, no. I have to have the hand in the work. It's not something that I subscribe to. I got to see the hand in the work. Tawny?
You can answer.
Well, I think there's something to consider. It's a great question, and it's very timely, so I do appreciate it. What it makes me think about, what I think the real question is that we need to be asking in relationship to AI, comes back to what we were talking about earlier. What are we doing to enable people to realize themselves as creators? Does AI facilitate that process, or does it give a false sense of an ability to create for people? I don't know if I can answer that for each individual. I use AI in some of my writing process as a thinking partner, but that's because I'm, getting a PhD, and I've learned how to think with a partner. And so I think what we ultimately need to be focusing on in terms of what is art, how do we make art, is exactly how you framed it here, of the transformational potential. AI could facilitate that. My worry is that many people see it as a substitute and give up that potential in themselves even further. And then we lose out on all of the amazing things that we've been able to talk about today.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I want to say. It's here. And so part of me sometimes wonders if it's how photographers looked at digital cameras when they first emerged, or graphic design, when Photoshop and all of those things. I don't know. I really don't know. I think it just depends on how it's used, and it goes back to integrity. If an artist is creating and they are making us think that they made this by their own hand, that's one thing. But if they are labeling it as AI, then that's another. So I don't really know how to answer that question.
I think the bigger question is like the programs that they're creating and where they're pulling that information from. So, you put in these trigger words, and all of a sudden you're getting work that belongs to other people. That's really the heart of the issue for me. To
your question about graphic design, some of the greatest art ever created was on Microsoft Paint. I stand by that. I saw there was a question down here.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is a silly question, but then like, what is art? I've seen some art that I question.
Mm.
I know I love the MoMA here, but the MoMA in New York, not so much.
Mm.
Some of the installations, like, and I'm just gonna be frank, leaning a neon tube of light against a wall doesn't really resonate with me. That doesn't mean it's not art, but yeah, I don't know. Like, it can be based off of the art that you've seen in your life, but like, it seems to be, I don't know. Like, how do you answer that?
I think for me personally, when I think about art and when I think about what art is and what it means, I mean, it could be a variety of different things, and art means different things to different people. I think what concerns me today is that a lot of times people just don't focus on making good art, whatever that is. It's like, I want to be the latest, I want to be the newest, I want to be the most entertaining, I want to be this, I want to be, just make good art, whatever that is. So that's the kind of trend that I see, where I'm listening to young artists or emerging artists. Instead of building that portfolio, they will go through the effort of seeing, okay, well, I want to be in that gallery, so I'm going to start making art like that artist so that I can get into that gallery.
Very
Instead
functional.
of, yeah, it's a very performative process.
Just to kind of speak on some of the tradition of that question, because it's an enormous question. Philosophers have been debating it for hundreds of years. And to tie that debate into our conversation today, color purple is on our mind. Thinking about God being in a purple flower is fascinating in the context of a thinker like Immanuel Kant, who is kind of one of the core thinkers that informs our answer to the question of capital A art today. And he develops the idea of the beautiful off of the metaphor of a flower, because it's supposed to be purposeless. It has no purpose, and so it can therefore be beautiful. But then when we bring in that African American tradition of thinking about finding beauty, value, and the spiritual in everyday life, that runs directly counter to that Western tradition of thinking. So I think there's multiple ways to approach that question of what is art, and the conversation between them is what I find fascinating.
I'm trying to now like regroup, but Delita, you touched on something that really I've been trying to figure out here as an artist myself and as a latecomer to art. Not at all, but really, I'm at 51. I'm now immersing myself in what I went to school for, many years ago. I'm kind of bringing myself back, and thanks to COVID, many of us are here. We find ourselves here, and one of the things I'm interested in is kind of around this idea you just said. People are seeing galleries and seeing the type of work that they are getting behind and supporting, and they are trying to mimic those things. One of the things I talked to a curator a year or so ago, who was just here, and we were, having a conversation, and he said, "You can paint, you know," and he said, "But you need to figure out what your thing is, and it was that, and it was that, and I was like, well, I feel like I'm in an experimentation stage, right? I'm creating, I'm having a similar to you, I'm having a spiritual conversation with my maternal ancestors that is calling me to talk to paint them into this current space. And so like what tools I use, what mediums, what things, it's all very experimental, but it doesn't mean that I have to sit and wait before I put it out to the world, until I have something that looks like, you know, that is thematic, I'll say, or that I've figured out the assembly line of it all, and so what do you think about that? Like, I love the idea of a retrospective. Even the first work that I did was able to be a retrospective from like here since I was in college, and to show the world. and people respected it for that. What do you think about this idea of we have to paint things in a theme? Is that so that people recognize us, or is that like, what I'm saying? I don't know.
Do not.
Question is, but
You do not. I'm going to go back to something I said earlier. I became an artist when I stopped giving a what people think and thought. I had to decide how important art was to me and what art meant to me, and I took it from there and made it what it is. That's the blessing and the curse of being an artist. A curse because it's super hard work. It's not easy, but it's a blessing because we have the space to be the creatives that we want to be. I mean, this whole art world is amazing to me because, I mean, Tawny, you said you were self-taught, and I mean, look what you've accomplished with that. I mean, I've built a studio where I can do any printmaking process I choose, paper making, and printing on clay. All of those things, I was able to create this space for myself, and so that's the beauty of what you're able to do. You don't have to do what people want you to do or what people think you should do, but be good at what you want to do.
Thank you all so much. Wonderful conversation. And I kind of want to circle back to this idea of copying and the question about AR kind of made it bubble back up to me. Again, sorry, I had this much wine and I'm kind of done. But again, and going back to whether or not this is really attributable to Picasso, it is said that he said, good artists copy, great artists steal. And what is the distinction that makes the difference for you, if there is? And I don't know if you can integrate the whole question of AI and copying.
I don't think that I'm doing anything new. Everything that I'm doing has been done before 20 times, a million times over, but I have put my spin on it. And so from that perspective, when I hear that quote, because I've heard that quite often, I mean, it's something that we all have done. You do it until you can figure out who you are. It's almost like training wheels on a bike. You looking at other artists' work is like training wheels. Now, the older I've gotten, the better I've gotten at doing it, because now I'm like, okay, for example, Kerry James Marshall, I look at one of his pieces and he and Micheline Thomas are like glitter king and queen, okay? Nobody can wield glitter like them, okay? But it's important, I'm not to say that I can't put glitter in my work, but if I had done that 15, 16 years ago, I would have did it only because I saw them do it and it worked for them. The difference between then and now is that I'm questioning, why did you do it? What was your reasoning behind doing it? Because it may be that I don't need glitter to say what you're saying. I might, use a metallic paper. I might use metallic ink. So that's the difference for me.
Yeah, and I think, again, it goes back to integrity, especially with AI. Like Delita mentioned earlier, who is being stolen from? And we don't know that. I know that we see a lot of artists and a lot of photographers saying that they feel that their work is being stolen. But I also think that when an idea, and I heard this before, and this time I can't attribute it to anyone, but I've heard it, when an idea wants to make its way in the world, it goes to you, and it also goes to someone else until what it wants you to say is said. So it's this thing where we think that our ideas are original and we think that they only belong to us, but whether that be the spirit of the Most High or our ancestors want this message to get out into the world, and they want it to be created.
I think that is a wonderful note to end on. Thank you both for joining me.
I want to thank all three of you. Thank you, Tawny. Thank you, Delita. Thank you, Luke, for this incredible conversation. It's been so rich, and I hope this has expanded your experience of the exhibition spectrum on color and contemporary art. If you haven't had a chance to immerse yourselves in it, I invite you to come back, spend more time with the exhibition, spend more time with the museum as a whole. This is one of the many events that we do here at the museum, and I actually appreciate you, Luke, for mentioning our Emerging Artists program. We will actually be having an artist talk with Lishan Az, the artist whose work you're seeing here on Saturday, February 10th, so just in a few days. So I invite you to come back if you're curious to hear more from this specific artist. And please continue engaging with the museum, whether that's becoming a member, making a donation, continuing to spread the word about our programs. If you are interested in becoming a member, you can apply today's ticket towards a membership. You can learn more about doing that at moadsf.org. And lastly, on your way out, I invite you to take one of these QR codes with you or take a photo of it. It takes you to a short program survey where you can share your feedback with us. We love hearing what you think, ideas for what you'd like to see in the future. So we really appreciate you taking that time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you.